Hello and thank you for watching the Angry Rooster Creations channel. Today we're looking at another fountain pen. This here is a Hongdian 517S. Now, in full disclosure with this pen, this is not originally a pen that I was looking to purchase. I was purchasing some other stuff on AliExpress. And I found myself short on the $10 minimum required with some of the things that I was purchasing to get free shipping. And I think I needed like $4.80 shipping cost or purchase cost to negate about $6 or so worth of shipping. And so I was looking for things to add to the cart to finish out that order, and I thought about doubling the one of the things that I already had in the order, but I decided instead to get a duplicate pen for the other pen that I was ordering in that order, that instead I would go for something else. So I picked this up, kind of, sort of on a whim, as it were. This is a pretty much almost entirely a stainless steel pen. It has a threaded on cap. The grip section as well as the barrel are both stainless steel, as well as the cap. This one in particular has an extra fine nib. It comes with an included converter that is a 3.4 millimeter Chinese standard converter. Now this is a different style of converter than the other Jinhaos that I have, or excuse me, Hongdians. I'm getting ahead of myself. That have a converter more similar to this Jinhao converter that I have here, where it has a pressed-on chrome ring on a sort of Lamy style converter. This one is actually a little bit nicer in my personal opinion. One, it's frosted, and instead of having the little spring in here that are usually in the Hongdian pens for breaking up surface tension, you've got this little, I presume that might be an acrylic bead in there to serve the same purpose. But also, and more importantly in my opinion, for the purposes of cleaning and maintaining this converter, the sleeve there that holds the converter together is actually threaded, which will make it much easier to disassemble this converter to fully clean it out when you change inks, and to re-grease the threads and to re-grease the head of the piston, which is nice. It has the typical Hongdian nib and feed section in this sort of number 5 style feed, where it screws out of the pen and is exchangeable with other Hongdian nib and feed sections. Now, one thing of note that I think is kind of interesting, this has the same nib style, the sort of, I guess, the older sort of Hongdian nib style that would have been seen a lot on pens like the Black Forest here, which I've done a video on. This is my 1861 Black Forest Pro, the brass model. But it doesn't have the same feed as like the Black Forest pen. It's actually got the same feed that is seen in, say for instance, my Hongdian C2s here, which have the newer, slightly more flexy nib, but have that same more blocky feed. Or actually, there's a little bit of difference here now that I've got them side by side, but it is more in line with that style of feed, but with the older, slightly stiffer style of nib, which I find kind of interesting. These are friction fit. The nib and feed, it pulls right out of there. Of course, I pulled the O-ring off of that assembly there, but it's a friction fit nib and feed. And There is sort of a step on the feed that keeps you from over inserting the nib here. But on this particular one, now this one does have a keyed section. I don't know how well it's going to show up, but there is a flat there you can see. So this does have a keyed nib assembly. The reason I bring that up is, like when I said in my video that I did of the brass M2 pocket pen, the nib and feed assembly on it was keyed, but on the the C2 here, that nib and feed assembly is not keyed. You can rotate that nib and feed assembly 180 degrees. It doesn't matter. It is, or 360 degrees, excuse me. It's just a simple friction fit. So there is a little bit of a part difference here between the various pens. Now that grip section there is all stainless steel, and it appears from my look, it's a one-piece stainless steel grip section here. Now you can see it's got a bit of a texture, sort of a deliberate brushed texture that's kind of brushed at an angle here, and it's got ribbing there. I figure some people might find this to be a little slick. It doesn't bother me, but you know, maybe if you're the kind of person who tends to be prone to having sweaty hands and sweaty fingers, you might find this grip section here slick for your tastes. And then on the barrel here, this seems to just be a piece of drawn out stainless steel tubing. It has a pressed in threaded section here, which has both your cap threads and the internal threads to thread onto the section, as well as a pressed in tail cap. Now, going on to the cap, we have a simple stainless steel clip. It is a quite stiff clip. I mean, that's really stiff. I don't see you springing this clip. So, if you have this, say, on a pant pocket or something like that, and you happen to walk by something and something hangs on this clip, I really don't see it springing this clip, like this getting sprung out. It's actually quite a thick clip. It's not, it doesn't appear to be a stamped piece, because I don't see any stamped. If you can see under there, I don't know how well that's going to show up. There's not, it's clearly not rolled and stamped. I'm not entirely sure. If it is stamped, then it was welded, ground, and then plated, so you can't really tell that it's stamped. I'm not entirely sure how this was manufactured. Like I said, if it was stamped, then there was some welding, grinding, and other type of finish work. So that's interesting to me. And then on the back, you have the the Hongdian branding and the 517S model number. Looking at that, that appears to be and feels to be laser engraved into the stainless. Now, the one place that I might have a bit of a ding against this pen is that down inside this cap here, you have a short sort of half liner. Sorry about that. You have a short sort of half liner that is plastic. If we look inside, if I can get this to show, come on, let's see if I can get in there. It's kind of like the liner on the Hongdian M2 pocket pen that I reviewed, where it only that liner is really only in part of the pen, and then the up towards the actual top end of the cap is just the bare metal of the cap. Now, the reason I say that that's a little bit unfortunate that is plastic is that little bit of a cap liner is where the threads are that thread onto the grip. Well, excuse me, not the grip section, but onto the threads on the barrel there. So you do have a metal to plastic thread for the cap, which that's not really an ideal situation. Now, I originally looked at this and I was like, well, that's bad. But there is maybe a bit of a saving grace. I got to looking at this real close. I'm going to see if I can get this in a magnifying glass, if that will help. Don't know if this will actually... I don't know how well it's going to show up. But if you can see, at the edge profile on these threads, that is not a sharp edge profile. It is a squared off thread profile, kind of like a very, very, very small Acme thread. And it's probably, like I said, not going to show up, but I can see it when I use the magnifying glass myself. It is chrome plated, and there is a very smooth surface finish. So while this is a plastic thread and threaded insert on this cap going onto metal threads, because it's not a sharp thread profile and the surface finish on those threads is very smooth, I think there's going to be less of a tendency for that plastic threaded liner in the cap to get eaten up by the threads when you take this pin on and off, or when you take the cap on and off the pin. That being said, it would have been nicer for that insert here to have been metal, so it would have been metal on metal threads. Now, one of the reasons I can tell you that they didn't do that, I don't know how well this is going to show up because my attempt to shine the light down in the cap didn't really work too well. But just beyond the threads in there are some sort of vertical splines in that plastic part of that liner, and that is what allows this pin to post. And this pin does post. But like I said, that liner is what allows this pin to post, and it's not wedging into the threads, it's wedging into those fins. And if you can see, it actually has quite a standoff from the barrel of the pin. So you're not going to be scratching the barrel. And the only thing about that is, there's not a burr here, but that is a very square edge on that cap. And when I try to, I hold this posted, you can kind of feel that, or at least I can kind of feel that where it hits my hand. It's not terrible, it's not like taking skin off, but it's not necessarily the most comfortable if it catches you a certain way. If you're somebody that likes to post a pin like this, you might would want to take some kind of maybe even like your micro mesh pad if you've got one for working on nibs or something, and just kind of give this thing a whirl to maybe sort of break that edge just a little bit to help improve the comfort. I mean, myself personally, I usually don't post pins, and this pin not posted, it is not a problem for me to write with this pin unposted. Speaking of which, the length on this pin appears to be 4 7/8 of an inch. So that means it's just a hair shorter, unposted, than my favorite comparison pin, because it's a pretty ubiquitous pin. There's my Lamy Safari, which is about 5 1/8 of an inch overall, or just shy of it. And so it's just a hair shorter than a Lamy Safari, about a 1/4 inch or so. So if you're somebody that can write with a Lamy Safari unposted, you probably would not have a problem writing with this pen unposted. And also, I would say this, even though there's a step down where those threads are from the barrel to the section, there is quite a bit of a step down there. You can feel that, but for me, there's a pretty generous length to this grip section here. So I don't find that I would have an issue with that step down there. It's not the slightest step down, certainly. There are pins that have less, kind of less pronounced step downs here. It's not the worst that I've seen. It's also not necessarily the best, but with the length of the grip section for me, which that grip section from the start of the threads to the end of the section is about 1 1/16 inches. I find that it doesn't give me a problem when gripping the pen. Now, like I said before, while you do have those little turned ridges here, and there is sort of a texture to this grip, I don't think I'm going to have a problem with it. But if you're somebody who, like I said, has an issue with perspiration and having your, prone to having sweaty hands, this is probably going to be a slick section for you. Like, this probably isn't going to be something you're going to enjoy writing with, because you're probably going to have a problem keeping a grip on it. Now, me personally, I have hand eczema. I've got the opposite problems. My hands are always excessively dry, so that's not an issue I've ever had to deal with. But for those that do, that could be a deal breaker for you. Now, one last thing I would like to mention, though, about this is that when you do put this cap on, this joint here between the cap and the barrel, you can see it's just barely visible. There is no perceptible misalignment here. So I've had other times where you have a thread like this where the two parts will kind of mismatch when they're threaded, so they'll be off one side or the other, because maybe the threads will be not concentric to the bore of the cap or not concentric to the bore of the barrel, so there's a little bit of a mismatch. So on one side you'll have, say, a step going towards the barrel, and the other side you'll have a step going towards the cap, where they're sort of skewed from one another. This is probably one of the most seamless transitions, at least on these lower end pens like this, that I've seen. So that's actually a big plus in my book. Like I said, I still have a bit of a criticism in particular with that plastic threads on metal threads still being something I'm not fond of, but the actual execution of the aesthetics of the pen here, how this all fits together, is pretty nice. Like I said, there may be perhaps a little bit too square of an edge here. I might end up breaking that to kind of smooth that a little bit. Maybe even take the, hit something right here to do the same on that joint. It's not like it's sharp. There's not really a burr, but it's a pretty, it's a pretty acute square edge. Like, it's not going to take any skin off, but it could be smoothed up a little bit. That being said, if I do that, it will make that joint there more pronounced. So, you sacrifice a little bit of aesthetics for comfort if you decide to do that, or if I decide to do that. But that's to each their own, whether or not that's something that a person would feel is a necessary thing. So I think that pretty much covers everything in terms of the features, the external features of the pen itself. The next thing will be for me to go ahead and ink this pen up and do a little bit of a writing sample with it. Alright, so here I am back. I have now inked this pen with, this is a sample of Noodler's North African Violet. I had purchased some stuff from Goulet Pens once, and I decided to grab that little, I added the random ink samples to my cart, and that's one of the ink samples that they sent, was that North African Violet there. So I'm now going to take this and we're going to see how she writes. Like I said before, this is a extra fine nib, so this is my first time writing with it. And she's already writing, so let's see. This is a Hongdian 517S. It's an EF nib. Alright. So far it seems to be writing quite well. I'm not having any kind of flow issues. Now this is the 50-pound Koh-i-Noor sketch paper I've used in some of my other pen and ink test videos. It is not an absorbent paper. So there's a normal line weight. Going to apply a little bit of pressure, see what kind of variation we can get. And this nib is a bit springy feeling. It's not quite as springy as the nib that's in the M2 and the C2s. But I can coax a little bit of line variation, but I don't really want to try to force line variation out of this. Seems to be pretty decently wet for an extra fine. Now I am going to do this because in a couple of my, like the C2s, I mentioned in the video with the C2s that with those pens, both of them kind of wanted to, like crossing a T, kind of didn't want to write, but for the most part, I've had a couple where it's kind of skipped doing that really. But this seems to be a bit more consistent in the flow. Part of that could be ink selection. This could be a wetter ink. Like I said, this is just, I haven't really used this ink much. It's just a random sample that I had. But so far, this one doesn't have any kind of problems keeping up. So, I really do like that shade of purple. It's a pretty ink. So yeah, that seems to be keeping up pretty well there. Let's see. My good old handy dandy standard of comparison. I'm going to use my extra fine Lamy Safari here to sort of compare line weights. Let's see what we got. So you can see in that line weight there, the line weight is pretty much on par with an extra fine Lamy Safari nib that I have. So you're in Western standard fine or extra fine territory here. This is in the Japanese, and you can see with those horizontal strokes, applying a little bit of pressure, you can coax some line variation out of this nib. Once again, it's not really a flex nib, so I wouldn't try to push that too far. You might spring the tines. As you can see, it didn't really have, I mean, there's a couple times on some of those T strikes I was able to get it to skip with those really fast strikes. The little S squiggles there seems to write the same in pretty much all directions. I don't really see any variation in line weight there. And it feels fairly smooth. Now, this is a bit of a textured paper here, but it doesn't seem to really be dragging on the page or anything. I'm not picking up any fiber from the paper. I'm going to test, see if it will. It does reverse write, so a bit dry. I suspect if you tried to reverse write for an extended amount of time, you might end up running out of ink, and it's a bit scratchy on the reverse. I wouldn't say this is the smoothest extra fine nib that I've used, but it's not bad. Like I said, it's not scratching the paper, it's not pulling fibers up, and it does reverse write. As you can see right here, kind of dry, but it does do it, and you can see there is a difference in that line weight there with the reverse writings. Now, I did just go and double check to make sure I had my numbers correct. And I can give you the price that I paid on this pen. The price that I paid on this pen was $5.90. Now, I know that as of right now, things are kind of changing and subject to change as far as global trade and all. You know, with the way things are going in global markets at the moment. So, you know, that price could be subject to change. Also, you now have to deal with a tax that gets added on if you're, say, ordering from AliExpress like I did. So just because a sticker price is $5.90, even if you get the free shipping, does not mean that it's $5.90 out the door. I think out the door at the time I bought this was $6.47 on this. So, you know, that's something that has to be considered too. Now, for that price, personally, from so far, this obviously is initial impressions. I believe it's worth it. This pen does feel like a bit higher quality than some of the Chinese pens you find. Like I said, there's no obvious steps or, you know, mismatches, the things you would usually see on some of these lower end pens where some of these parts go together, where you might be able to hang a nail on something. If I had to give, you know, if I had to be reaching for some criticisms, like I said, I would say that, you know, maybe that edge could be smoothed over just a little bit on the cap, because you can kind of feel it a bit depending when you're writing posted. It's not really that bad, and you could criticize the edge here, the edge of the barrel, just before you reach the threads. Like I said, for some people, that grip section, you'll probably find that to be slick. It's not a problem that I deal with, but some do. So, you know, like I said, some people probably won't like that. So far with this one, it seems to flow well. The ink seems to flow well. The biggest criticism, though, that I have is the fact that you do have plastic threads going onto metal threads for the cap. However, like I said, it is more of an Acme style thread instead of a sharp thread profile. So I would say that as a general rule of thumb, what you would expect to see between plastic and metal threads, I believe the threads in this cap will probably last longer. That being said, if I had to narrow out one single detractor from this pen, it would be that right there. But overall, from what I can see, from what I can feel, just from the writing that I've done, I certainly believe there are worse, you know, $6 pen purchases you can make. It's just a matter of if this style of pen here is what you're into. So, having all that been said, I hope that those of you that watch this, you got something useful out of it, that the information was potentially helpful to you, maybe sway your decision one way or the other on whether this looks like it would be a pen for you. And if you watched this far into the video and you got some information out of it, you thought it was useful, I would really appreciate a like down there. That helps me out. If you have any questions about the pen, any comments, critiques on the way I presented the information in the video, you know, or any additional information you would like to add, maybe with your own experiences with this pen, if you have any, you know, drop them down there in the comment section below. I don't really get a lot of comments, so when I see comments, I usually do try to respond back to comments that are in my comment section on my videos, so I will try to get back to you if you drop something down in there. And if you watch this video, maybe you've watched some of my other videos, you like the way that I try to present my information, or you know, you think I do a pretty good job with the videos, I would really appreciate a subscription. That would also help me out. So, with having said all of those things, I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.